First of all, I like to make this really informal. If you've got questions or if you've got things that you've used for external parasites, and I'll tell you why that's important. Because on the scientific literature side, we're having to go back to the 1940s and 1950s on how to deal with some of these pests when it comes to backyard poultry. But I'm going to try to give you some things to think about, things that you maybe should be looking for just in general as you're looking at your birds. And I'm here to learn from you guys just as much as I'm here to share information. So like I say, if you have something, and I'll try to stay out of your guys' way as we go through there. But when it comes to external parasites, you know, these are the typical systems that we're trying to look into and try to address when it comes to pest management, whether it's a broiler operator, whether it's even in the brood houses. We're dealing with different kinds of pests. You know, we have different kinds of pests that are in hatcheries versus broiler operators. But when you have a commercial system like this, it's very controlled, very tight. We can control everything down to temperature and moisture gradients into particular parts of that house. Well, when it comes to this scenario, you guys have a lot more factors that you are dealing with. And I'll be honest with you, most of the new data coming out is coming out of California, that we know that we have sound data. So they're going in there and actually sampling birds and measuring every kind of external parasite on those birds. Well, how different are we from California, specifically Southern California, in our climate?
Oh, we're pretty close to
so yeah, I mean, now if we were like out in Boise City, you know, we could probably get some comparisons out there, but you know, especially South Central over to the eastern part of the state, you know, it's quite a bit different. So the other thing I want to kind of hit on is kind of the latter part of this talk is your own public health for the in and around your environment and yourself. Because we have a bug that is getting more prominent in and around suburban, urban areas that's transmitting a pathogen known as Chagas disease. And if you think about Chagas disease, historically it's been associated with Latin America and Central America. And where do you think they always find this bug? Chicken coops. So what I'm going to try to ask you guys is maybe how we can help you, and if you want to start submitting samples to us, we can tell you if it's a kissing bug or not. And then we actually have a small grant that we're testing them for the Chagas disease parasite. So I'll kind of go into that a little bit more. But Poultry Science published an article. This is one of the main peer-reviewed journals that a lot of poultry production research is published in, and they assessed basically backyard chickens, flock owners all across the U.S. And this is what they were concerned with: external parasites. You as growers, do you guys agree with this? Do you think external parasites are something you worry about, or percentage of respondents are that you're thinking about more so than other things?
I think yes, especially because backyard chickens, a lot of us have them as pets, and our kids pick them up and cuddle them, and then we all start to itch.
That's a great point.
I think yes.
Yeah. And I think it is very important, but I think on the health side of things, your internal parasites, and especially like what he was talking about, Marek's disease and avian influenza, is certainly something that you need to be concerned with on the production side of things. But on the public health, your own family health, external parasites are something that you need to be thinking about and worried about to a certain extent. So, one of your questions, what is the #1 parasite of backyard poultry? And it's considered the northern fowl mite. We have gathered data from Georgia, from the southeast, and even in Oklahoma, and all the way to California. And this is pretty much the most prevalent species that we find on all flocks. And the reason for that is it's a mite. It's a small mite that is a major problem in commercial hatcheries. When we consider this pest, it is a major pest in commercial hatcheries. So when it comes to backyard poultry, this is another issue that, and so you were talking about getting itchy, biting. This is something that will bite you, and you could have, you know, some small bumps from. But again, they prefer birds. So most mites that are in these systems prefer the birds. So you're just an accidental thing that they ran into and say, hey, let's taste. Do you taste good or do you taste bad? Most times you taste bad. And they just bite you and leave. They're not staying on you. They're not a burrowing mite in relation to you. Now they will burrow into chickens. That's under a microscope. What you'll see is kind of a brownish type color, tan. But again, what you're normally seeing is a byproduct of that mite feeding. You're not usually seeing the mites themselves because these are small microscopic mites. Smaller than any kind of tick, smaller than a flea, very small. So if you want to associate what mites cause, have any of your pets ever had mange? Oh, yeah. So some of the mange that you can get into with your pets are from mites, certain kinds of mites and feeding. If you have other species, I know you're at the goat camp, certain goats can get mites and it causes lesions. So usually you see the lesions before you see the actual mite. This one is, I mean, I would say larger than some of our burrowing mites, like those that cause some of the mange and other species, but it is still small mite, excuse me. So that's probably the most important thing to you guys. I don't care what they do, just figure out how to get rid of them. Yeah. But to get rid of them, we have to know a little bit about their biology. This is what we call, it goes through what we call sometimes historically gradual metamorphosis. So you have a reproductive female that lays a larvae, then it becomes a nymph, then an adult. So this is similar to other things that will bite you and pretty common in Oklahoma. Have you ever heard of seed ticks? So this has the same life cycle as a tick. So that larva stage in a tick is what's called a seed tick. Very small, embeds into you, just run. So they go through the similar life cycle as a tick. And so again, usually what we see is eggs will hatch about 1 to 2 days. Again, everything's depending on temperature, environment. But what we're really concerned about are these nymphal stage. The nymphs are the ones that are actually biting the animals. The adult females will bite the animals. The adult females have to have blood to produce eggs. So that's why they're very ferocious biters, but the complete life cycle can take place in as few as 5 to 7 days. And if you want to think of this, you're not dealing with 1 or 2 mites that are doing that. You're usually dealing with hundreds of mites. And we even have had birds that have had thousands of mites on them. So, and to go to the question, how many is too bad? Well, when conditions are optimal, so optimal condition for a mite is associated with host. So what's your body temperature? So hopefully all of us have somewhere pretty close to that. Different animals have different body temps. So optimal conditions are not always related to environmental conditions. And so if you have a healthy bird and they're going inside or have some kind of coop that they're going into, that is an optimal condition. What I'm saying is that we can have northern fowl mites just as easy in December as we can in, say, May or June. Now, I will say it probably gets a little too hot in July and August to have a major mite problem. But when we usually see mites, usually starting now, a lot of mites, excessive mite populations now all the way into May or June. So this can be a seasonal pest as well. 20,000 per bird in 9 to 10 weeks. Mite populations of 200,000 will kill a bird. just due to mere blood loss. This is what you're normally going to see right here. The byproducts of the mite. There are mites in that, but it's these scabby lesions that you'll see. And so sometimes if you have 20,000 mites or 200,000, you'll break those lesions apart around the margins, and there would just be hundreds of these mites that you would be able to see because of the sheer numbers. But again, the northern fowl mite has been associated with poultry for a long time. It doesn't only affect the meat side or just the production efficiency of the bird. It also affects eggs because you get a reduced egg output. This is a picture from a colleague in California that had a very heavy mite infestation. Those are actually northern fowl mites on the egg. So it's still small, so it's hard to tell if it's what it is initially, but because we knew those are northern fowl mites, that's a good indication of how big they are and what you can see. In general, when you have mite-stressed birds, they'll have a kind of a pinkish comb, but there's other things that can cause a chicken to have a pinkish comb. So basically, if you have some of these other things, reduced intake, loss of weight, and especially very rapidly, and that pale comb, you might check them for mites. But I will tell you, once you start getting to that weight loss and pale comb, you'll be able to see those mites and the crusty lesions. The feathers can darken just due to the sheer amount of excreta from that mite, because they're blood feeders. So any blood feeder has to excrete some of that in a rapid form because of so much water that's in blood. Again, what we usually say is December through March for economically important, but you can find them on birds now, really October all the way into May and June. Just to think about this, when you have what we call kind of more of an obligate type parasite, which they're very heavily associated with their host. When it gets warm, they actually can't reproduce as fast because of the temperature. Higher temperatures don't allow them to reproduce as much as, say, cooler temperatures. Now, I'm not saying they're going to be developing at optimal conditions when it's 10 below, but think of our winters in Oklahoma. What kind of winter do we have?
Pretty mild.
It's pretty mild, but we still have cool nights. Those cool nights allow this mite to really reproduce. So even though it may get up to 70 during the day, but in the morning it could be 30, 32 degrees. So those cool temperatures allow them to be reproductively efficient because they are so closely associated with that bird, that animal. So again, it's similar to lice. We tend to have more lice problems because they are so associated with that host, more so than the summer. So we do know that when you start putting birds more inside and where they're rubbing against each other, even if they have separate cages, if they're rubbing against each other, they're transmitting this mite. So there are some production practices because you're trying to protect them, and just behaviorally for those birds, they're going inside more to stay warm, allows for transmission to occur more frequently. But it's a great point, great observation that because of the cooler temperatures, they'll be inside, transmission occurs more than likely. So northern mites, oh, look at that last point. Man, that's a great point. So, mites may be introduced, say you start off with a new coop or a new operation. You haven't had birds on it at all, or you know where your birds, you haven't had a mite infestation. The number one way your flock gets infested is by new birds. But they can also mean by wild birds as well. So, but the introduction of new birds is the main form of transmission. So even if you're quarantining new birds, but your backyard flock has all these other wild birds that are feeding on the same food that you put out for them, that's also a biosecurity thing you need to think about too. If you have a backyard flock, I would hopefully you want to limit some of the wild bird interactions with your flock because of just other things that wild birds can bring into.
I've already had a severe case of it.
Yeah.
2 years ago, I brought in a cockerel.
Yeah, and it had mites.
Well, unbeknownst to me.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, that's a great point. If you get a new bird, you may not notice them because most mite infestations go unnoticed. The thing to do, depending on what kind of bird you're dealing with, is to look right around the vent area, and that's usually one of the first spots that we can find a low level of northern fowl mites. Now, heavy infestations, you can find them all over, even in the combs and everything, but around the vent area, you will be able to find some of those mites.
Yeah, mine was, I introduced a cockerel, and it was probably about 3 months later that I noticed my girls were shaking their heads.
Yeah.
So then I checked them, and of course I had the matty feathers on the vent, and of course it was in the, like January, February in Minnesota.
Yeah.
So I had to have a hairdryer cages in my garage and gave them all baths every 3 days.
Yeah. I'm going to show you a method.
Because of the life cycle before I could get rid of them. I mean, luckily I didn't have that many hens to have to bathe them.
Yeah, so that brings up a great point. Most of the products that are labeled for mites, northern fowl mites, you have to retreat because it doesn't do anything for the sometimes what we call the larval or certainly the egg stage. So basically, again, since the mite can go through a generation in 7 days, what we try to advocate is that you retreat 7 to 10 days after that initial treatment. It's similar to lice. Most of the products out there do nothing for the eggs. So you still got a population waiting to come out.
And keep cleaning the coop.
Yeah, so and that's, and you got all this information right here. So I have some of this but I will say the coops and the egg flats, if you have egg flats or anything that are in with the birds, those will transmit the mites as well. You have to clean them or get rid of them. I'll tell you what, there's some egg flats that it's a whole lot easier to get rid of them than try to clean them to where the actual mites are actually in those cracks and crevices. You do have to be careful with pesticides and retreatment. Some of those, especially for layers, for eggs, that you can't exceed more than once every 4 weeks of application. But your mite infestation will still be present at a high level because of just the type of life cycle it has. If you don't get rid of most of them, it's going to continually reproduce and still be a problem. Dust products are, there's labeled pesticides that are dust that you can dust and they even have some now where it uses the chicken's behavior, where they'll kind of interact with the dust more, and it gets to down with it. And there are some products that you can put directly on them that, as you say, when we say bathe them, it's more or less spraying them really well. So yeah, so the Dawn dish soap suffocates the mite because it's the soap coating goes around their body where they can't exchange oxygen or breathe. Is that there's some natural dusts like sulfur dust that have been used by this manner. Can you see? These are little smaller burlap bags that you can buy from Hobby Lobby right here. In fact, this study was done in California, but this is where they bought those little bags. And they filled them with a dust bag, one that they hang up where the chicken can interact, and one that they just put on the side. What I want to show you, though, this is just a simple sulfur dust. Look at the decrease in the amount of northern fowl mites. So the permethrin, the small circles, is that's pretty much the only product, the commercial insecticide that you can put as a dust on your chickens. So that's one that's been out there. The clipped and hanging bag, so if you go up, this is the clip bag, this is the hanging bags, more on your right. So going back to that, look at the hanging bag as far as what we call a mean mite score, because it takes too much time to count every mite. So we put them into mite scores. Again, this is done, basically previous work suggests that visual mite scores of less than 3 is less than 100 mites per bird. So if you're less than 3, you're less than 100 mites per bird. Look what the hanging bag did just in comparison. And basically we had 2 different populations here and 2 different areas, but by week 5, they let the populations go up and then they treated. And if both treatments on both are on the bottom has a clip bag and a hanging bag, reduce the mites by 8 weeks to nearly nothing. Yep, treatment occurred at 5 weeks. Yep, and so, I mean, have you ever seen, one way to kind of figure out if a chicken is infested with things, they'll start just dusting themselves. Yeah, and everything, and so the same type of behavior. They're interacting with that bag and it's just dusting them. And again, to get the product, what's really novel about this technique, it's utilizing the bird's own behavior to disseminate the product. You're not having to hold that bird, you're not having to put that product on there at all. You put it in a bag, they put it on, it's a self-application device. So, and sulfur is pretty cheap. You can get different commercial formulations from a lot of different areas. It's, I mean, you do need to not concentrate it. 90% sulfur. This is where they got theirs, but it was just a sulfur manufacturer. So, but again, you can get sulfur from a lot of different things. So 90% wettable sulfur you can get from various companies. So I think there's a multitude of ways you could apply this. So, but the hanging bag is probably more efficient. Just looking at some of the raw data from the study, the hanging bag tended to always perform better versus just the average performance. So the hanging bag, so try it in different ways. Maybe we should do a study. Mice will not bring this mite in because this mite is very bird specific. This mite is like, it'll get on wild birds and commercial birds, but it's not going to get on mice. So, but very bird specific. Here's the other mite. This is, again, the color is deceiving. It looks, the common red mite, again, is found worldwide. But we usually always find it on older chickens, but if we find a lot of these on younger chicks, they usually die from it because it's, they can transmit pathogens. Northern fowl mite can transmit pathogens as well, but it's a blood-feeding mite. Now, how could you differentiate between a northern fowl mite and this mite? No. The only way we make that difference is if we're getting it under a scope and looking at that mite under a scope. They do have a red color to them, so they're more what we call cryptic, meaning they're more active at night. So if you're out there and looking at your chickens or looking at the coop in the middle of the day, you're probably not going to see this mite at all. And it's hard to see in general. The life cycle is pretty much similar to the northern fowl mite. So treatment and retreatment is exactly the same when it comes to this mite. But if you were to rank these, and probably what you're going to occur is if you have a mite infestation, I would say 85 to 90% of the time it's always going to be the northern fowl mite. But secondarily, you could have this mite come in as well. It's an important one, but you're not going to be able to make that distinction. Treatments are all the same. Now, the sulfur bags weren't tested on this, but premise treatment as well as bird treatment is required for this one because it gets into the cracks and crevices. So if you have a northern fowl mite infestation or any kind of mite infestation, it's just about treating the birds and then doing some kind of sanitation around the coop. Any questions about those two mites? Again, it will cause crusty lesions, severe infestations. The infestations we normally see at first are around the vent area. So this is a unique pest because it's a soft tick. And why it's unique, most of the soft ticks we deal on the veterinary side, whether it's cattle, horses, or anything, it's the immatures that feed. But this tick, the adult will feed on as well. Again, it's a blood-feeding tick, and why it's important to know it as a soft tick. How many of you have ever pulled a tick off of yourself? Yeah. If you haven't, I'm going to ask how long you've been in Oklahoma. But a soft tick, when you look at it from the top, is you won't see its head. This is the bottom side of that tick. Sometimes they look like a peanut in shape. Especially the ones that we find in cattle. This one can have that peanut appearance, but it's a soft tick. So meaning that it's a little bit different. The nymphs, the immature stages, and the adults only feed at night. That's when we'll see feeding. This one's really hard to detect. Because if you're only looking at your birds in the middle of the day and you start seeing maybe some blemishes or some maybe raised areas that you could tell something bit them, but then you look around and you don't ever see anything, get a headlamp on and go in there at night and see what you could see. And it's usually where we see activity is between anywhere from about, just depending on how dark it is, meaning a kind of a no moon night, anywhere from about 10 o'clock to midnight is when we see a lot of activity for this mite, or for this tick. In general, the reproductive potential, she doesn't lay as many eggs as some of our other ticks. They can hatch out in anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. The larvae drop off of the host, but this can be associated with premises as well. But they tend to like to return to their same hiding spot. So if you do some kind of premise treatment, especially what we call a crack and crevice type treatment, meaning you're getting a sprayer and spraying in the small cracks, anywhere that a bug can kind of get into. That's where this one would hide, and they tend to like the same. And that's why we say sanitation is the best technique for controlling this tick. Putting out insecticides even on your birds is not going to be on it because this tick's not feeding on your on the birds for a long period of time like the mites are, but it will feed on your animals. So sanitation is one of the best things. Any questions about the fowl tick? Okay, I would be surprised if any of you have ever seen it. Even a person in my field veterinarians don't see these as well very often. So, but we do know that they can cause significant impact especially if they're feeding at night. Okay, lice. How many of you think you've seen lice on your chickens? Lice on chickens would look pretty similar to lice that you'd see either on us, different species, or if you've ever seen a lice. How many of you have seen a lice infestation? I have kids. I'll be honest with you. I have seen lice infestations, and then of course we work with cattle. You can see them. If you see them, I mean, it's pretty similar. The main problem we have are chewing louse. So those that are not actually taking a blood meal, but feeding on some kind of they can irritate the skin. They irritate the chickens quite a bit. One of the most common ones is the chicken head louse, and from its name, where do you think we're going to find it? Around the chicken head, around the comb. And so But it's fairly easy to control. We don't see resistance at all building up with it's an occasional problem. If you put some kind of application, whether what the data shows using synthetic insecticides, it controls them very well. And so, and the other thing is because lice will very rarely leave the bird, you need to do some kind of premise treatment when you have an outbreak. You don't need to do a premise treatment just to do it. A premise treatment would require is mainly taking an insecticide or cleaning and just cleaning the coop or spraying spraying the insecticide where the birds rest. These are the 6 main lice species that are commonly found on backyard poultry. Chicken head louse is on here, but if you notice, the distinguishing characteristic of lice species is we look at their head. If their head is as wide as their thorax or wider, it's a chewing louse. But the only way you see that is under a microscope. You can't just pick up a louse. See it. Some lice species are fairly large, so most of the lice that are common in backyard poultry, so different species, some of these don't even have common names. So they just have genus and species. So, but if you have a lice infestation, you can you treat them all the same. You want to treat them by doing some kind of animal isolation of new animals and treating those that are infested. Any questions on lice? Chicken head louse is probably the most common one. We typically always find it around the comb, sometimes around the eyes. You could see that one. But most of the common lice species we find, and they can get some of the lice from wild birds as well. In fact, lice have a very close relationship through historical times to birds. In fact, what we call, where they kind of, however you want to use these terms, how they co-evolve or modify throughout time, it's all associated to birds. So lice have a very close relationship with birds. These will not. Okay. Nope. They're very bird specific. So, in fact, most of these you'll just find on like commercial birds, and then in fact, if you trap wild birds, that is a gold mine for finding lice. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's the same species. Well, here's the thing: the lice are not going to be an issue unless So I will say this: lice become an issue when management is an issue. So as we go to this, 4:30, is that what I'm needing? Yeah, you got to go 4:30. Okay, so real quickly, the Sticktight Flea, why we call it the Sticktight Flea, because it's a different flea than the cat flea. Cat flea is the most common flea. That's the flea that gets on your dogs, on your cats. There's a dog flea out there, but 9 times out of 10, if you have a flea infestation, whether it's on a dog or cat, it's the cat flea. This one's slightly different. This one can get on pets. And where we tend to see this flea become a problem is when there's a lot of pets around the chickens. So usually there is evidence that young chicks can be insanguinated. Basically, a lot of these fleas can get on there and just really stress the bird out from the blood loss. So again, irritation and blood loss. It can be a severe poultry pest, but they usually feed on the eyes or comb area is where we usually find the Sticktight flea. Again, usually found on the heads. The females, again, are the ones that have to have the blood meal to lay eggs. All female external parasites have to have blood to produce eggs. That's kind of how it works. And then so they will fall off, and it's like most flea life cycles, they're in organic matter, whether it's in a chicken coop or in the yard. Like cat fleas, like the shag rugs, they like to get at the base of those because there's a lot of organic matter trapped in there. Again, this is a cool season pest, starting now, going through March or April is when we tend to see this, both in commercial and backyard flocks. Okay, bed bugs. Have you ever had bed bugs? Have you ever been bitten by a bed bug? How many of you have ever stayed at a hotel? Do you know there's a national website that tells you the hotel you're staying in and their bed bug rating? Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah. So, yeah. Needless to say, I'm always kind of looking it up on how I need to put my luggage on the floor or hang it up immediately, or so I don't bring bed bugs back. So, bed bugs are also a blood-feeding true bug, sometimes called swallow bugs. They were in the 40s and 50s. They called them chicken bugs because they did have an association with chickens. Again, this is typically what you see. You'll kind of it's flattened. That means it's got that big abdomen. Again, this is not a tick. This is a true insect. Bed bugs are again cryptic. That means cracks and crevices, but they will be, they're active at night, hence bed bugs. When do they feed on you? While you're asleep. So typically where we find them are cracks and crevices. They go through this gradual metamorphosis. Again, they'll have a larvae and then nymphs. So this is a typical area that you're gonna find them in residential areas. So box springs where they have seams. Again, that's a severe infestation. If you ever see that, you just burn the mattress. Just burn the mattress. Just get rid of it. In poultry operations, we tend to see them in, we can find them in wood shavings, in cracks and crevices. Where we tend to find these more on the commercial side are brooder breeders, or brooder houses. So like Cobb. Does everybody know who Cobb is? Kind of control the genetics, or one of the companies that Cobb. There's some of these that basically are providing the genetics or the young chicks for the larger operations, whether they're Tyson, Pilgrim's Pride. That's where we tend to see most of the bed bug problems. Again, they prefer hiding in wood or paper shavings. So if you have wood shavings, they prefer that. So you want to keep that in mind. Again, they prefer rough, dry substrates. And for a lot of you guys, that could be your coop area. So it's not a matter of, it's just, again, there is an odor to these. It has a sweet odor. In fact, there's a company, a national company, that they train Beagle dogs to go into residential areas or commercial buildings. And what do? Their sole purpose is to detect bed bugs based on the smell. It's very, and it works well. They're pretty specific and pretty accurate.
Did you know rice holes?
Rice holes, they found them in rice holes, but they tend to find them more in wood shavings. Where they found them in rice holes for certainly is where they have that 50-50 mix with rice holes and wood shavings. So how many of y'all use the rice hole shavings? Any of you saving? Okay. So rice hole shavings are used a lot in the broiler houses. Big commercials. So this is like a brooder breeder. We used to call them brooder houses, but they call them brooder breeders. And so again, this is like a area that can y'all see? Okay, can y'all see my cursor? Okay, these slat areas right through here is where they would find the bed bugs. And again, they call these nest boxes. Causes skin lesions and other things, reduced egg consumption. But for backyard poultry, how many of y'all have a situation like this? Where you have maybe a incubator, a feed source, and maybe small chicks. And with just any kind of wood shaving. You may not necessarily know you have a bed bug problem unless you're looking at these at night. So you may see the lesions. Sanitation is one of the best. If you're resupplying with fresh shavings on a pretty regular basis, you really don't have to worry about it. But if the shavings keep piling up in the area, then you could have bed bug problems if they're introduced. Bed bugs have to be introduced somehow. And specifically nest boxes or any kind of material that's being transported from one area to the next. Say if you buy equipment from somebody else and bring it in and don't sanitize it before you put it into operation, that's how you could bring bed bugs into backyard poultry, your backyard poultry operation. Any questions on bed bugs? Okay, this next pest is considered pretty much the #1 pest in broiler operations. In commercials, we can find this out in backyard, but we tend to always find this in commercial operations. This is the Darkling Beetle, also called the lesser mealworm, also called litter beetles. It's, if you want to know its real name, it's Alphatobius diaperennis. And so that's again, not really important. But it has been known to be associated with especially poultry. Where I would suspect a backyard poultry operation to get into these is if you're maybe got some sanitation issues, that you've got some areas that are collecting water. I'm not going to go through a lot of this, but basically this is a very small beetle. If you want to know how big this beetle is, it's about that big. I mean, it's very small. Where we tend to find these in commercial operations are under the feed lines or water lines. That's where we tend to find them. Now in severe infestations, we can find them all over our house. But when we're specifically trying to find them, we go to the feed lines, and that's where we'll find 9 times out of 10. They're pretty reproductively efficient. Adults and they live for a long time. They can live up to a year, the adults. And if you consider an adult female living for 12 months, each egg batch is about 200 to 400 eggs. So they go through a complete metamorphosis. This is what we call the larvae. So if you were to compare this to anything, you know, beetles go through complete metamorphosis or a complete life cycle. Think of your grubs that are in your yard. So they lay their eggs, they go through the larval stage known as the grubs, larval stage, and then they become adults. They pupate and then become adults. So the life cycle does take a little bit longer than some of these other pests. So again, optimal conditions, sorry, I used Celsius, but I'm sorry about that. I thought I caught all that. So again, pretty high temperatures. Trying to get my 9/5 formula going here. You got a 90 to 100. So it's like, so upper 90s into 100. So again, they like it warm. 90% relative humidity are considered optimal conditions. But they can develop in substrates that are as low as 30% moisture. So again, those are optimal conditions. If you want to think about the impact and how these can spread, so you have a typical female on the low side that can lay 200 eggs per egg batch. She's going to lay those 200 eggs, about in optimal conditions, every 5 days. You could have up to 1,200 eggs per month develop. So reproductively, it's a pretty efficient pest. But damages in broiler houses, they feed on insulation and the wood. All those holes in that wood are from litter beetles, looking for pupation sites. In fact, they did a study in Florida that beetle-infested houses energy costs reported to be 67% higher. That means they're losing heat from feeding on insulation. So Real quickly, we got about 10 minutes, but these are the main things I want you to get from this talk. That mites are usually going to be your biggest problem in a backyard poultry. Lice can also be an issue, but it can be sporadic, and you introduce your lice problem. Fleas can become an issue, but they're usually an issue when you have a lot of pet interaction. So dogs and cats in and around your backyard flock, where we tend to see more of the flea problem. Any questions on any of that? Any of these major pests that you can come in contact? So any ideas? Is there something I didn't mention that you think you may have a problem with? Flies? Flies?
Ideas about fly control?
Fly control for backyard poultry is putting probably a combination of some kind of bait away from the chickens so they're not eating it.
Yeah,
A bait, so what we use is we use little bowls and put them in secure areas because the bait attracts the fly. So you don't want to put the bait right by the coop.
right.
You want to put the bait like a little bit of ways, and then some kind of premise spray. Those two combinations, whether it's goats, chickens, or anything, tend to work the best for fly control. Sanitation is a big thing. If you've got a lot of wet areas or a lot of areas with tall weeds around, then you're going to have a fly issue. So the wet areas will allow them to breed. The tall weeds allows them to rest and thermoregulate and mate. So the weeds are providing mating sources, mating sites. As far as within the area, sometimes you can have issues with eggs and fly spots, the fecal spots. So what I would tend to do is try to utilize a sticky trap. There's a commercial one called, you can buy them through Atwoods, online, Valley Vet, just the sticky kind, but you don't want to put it inside the coop. You want it outside. Those attract stable flies and house flies. Those are your two main fly species that are going to be a problem. Mosquitoes can be a problem in certain areas. They will feed on your chickens, and as from your, do you remember the pathogen that can be transmitted by mosquitoes? I can't remember either, but he mentioned mosquitoes. What was it? Yeah. Yeah. Well, Chagas is what I'm about to talk about. Yeah. So, but fowlpox can be transmitted by the fowlpox virus. Mosquitoes are very efficient at transmitting viruses. So, Zika is a virus. West Nile is a virus. Encephalitis are viruses. So, but flies, and that's probably an important part I should probably incorporate into this, is to say, okay, occasionally you can probably have fly problems, and you may have them consistently too, but try to eliminate like what's attracting them or what's breeding the fly. Any questions on the flies? Well, I will say for flies, cedar shavings are less attractive. So you're completely right on that. So we don't see as many flies coming into land on cedar shavings as like just typical pine wood shavings. There is studies on that. As far as the northern fowl mite and the chicken red mite, we don't have studies that I'm aware of that utilize cedar as a deterrent. But it's a great point. But there is some scientific evidence that the cedar aroma is a repellent to pests. Yeah. But the research behind that on the mite side on chickens has not been done that I know of. So, but yeah, for bees, we're trying to figure out all kinds of things because it's hard with bee colonies. Okay, I'm going to talk about this and we can finish up with some questions. Kissing bugs are associated with chicken coops. So what is a kissing bug? First, they're big. When I say in perspective to bugs. That's the typical species that we have in Oklahoma, which is known as Tritoma sanguisuga. There's not an Oklahoma kissing bug, so we have to use the genus species. Texas has 3 species that can transmit Chagas disease. Chagas is a protozoan parasite, meaning the parasite is known as Trypanosoma cruzi, and it can survive out of the host for a little while, but it does very well within the kissing bug and within us and within dogs. If you want to look at Oklahoma, the risk groups are dogs and humans. Those are the 2 risk groups. Those are the 2 things that we're going to. These are the 3 species. Gersterkii is the largest one. This is sanguisuga, just the Texas version. I can't remember the species, but that one's also involved in Chagas disease. So if you want to look at it, and again, we don't have those 2, we have this one. But there's a lot of things that look like a kissing bug that aren't kissing bugs. And I don't have those slides on here because I didn't know how much time I would have. But where kissing bugs are generally found, historical records, Oklahoma's certainly there. Submissions as of 2013 through 2016, Oklahoma's actually involved. We have been receiving we've received about 60 kissing bugs since about, I would say, end of June, July. And I would say there's 10 to 11 of those that have been positive for Trypanosoma cruzi. Both found in human housing and in dog kennels. I'm putting this up here for you guys to be cognizant, and also if you find one, send it to us. And I'll talk about how to handle it. But again, this is its life cycle. Again, they go through 5 stages, but it's a gradual metamorphosis. So the first nymph stages don't have wings and they're not reproductive. Then you get into the adult stage, they're reproductively function and have wings. We have both. We've had nymphs submitted to us and adults. As you can tell, the adults are larger. They feed on you. Here's a good question for you. We got about 2 minutes. Why do you think they're called kissing bugs?
Get on your face.
They feed around your face. Yeah. They feed. In fact, in Latin America, where Chagas disease is a big problem, is they'll feed around the eyes, around the lips. Again, that's just their preferred feeding sites. In fact, most children in Latin America that have this, their eyes will swell shut from these bites. On dogs, it's not as specific. They'll feed on a dog pretty much anywhere. So I would say they would feed on a dog anywhere. Where we find them in the environment, again, these are night active. You're not going to see them during the day. They're night active. We find them in chicken coops. I put it at the bottom, but where most of the research from Latin America through South America through Central America, where Chagas is a main problem in kissing bugs, is they find them in chicken coops. So what I really want you guys to think about is if you think you've seen these, if you're out there at night sometime, or if you see these, you can find these during the day sometimes, but usually they're just there by accident. We want you to send them to us. When you pick up a kissing bug, you want to make sure you have a Ziploc bag around your hand or a glove. And it's not because they'll bite you, it's because they'll defecate on you. The way this Trypanosoma cruzi is transmitted is through defecation. But what happens is, say it feeds on you, so it's about that big. Say it's that big right here, or if it feeds on your hand, it's about that big. It defecates here, feeds you here. What do? You scratch, and so you just incorporated that fecal material into that bite site. That's how it's transmitted. You need to sanitize all surfaces just with a 10% bleach solution. we actually have this. I have this into a printable form for you guys. You don't even have to pay the postage. We have a grant. Dr. Kelly Allen has a grant that we would like this information that we are needing more, and I think it'd be a really good dynamic with your group to see if what kind of pathogens are these things carrying. You do not have to worry about any regulatory issues with this. This will never come back to you. What we will do is we will share results with you if they do come back positive. Again, Chagas is not an issue with your birds, but it is an issue for you and your dogs. So again, with that, I'd take any questions if we have time. I like this cartoon. Let you have some time to read it. Yeah. So I like, we try to utilize a lot of resources. So chickens have a different viewpoint probably than how we view them though. The bottom two are really the funniest ones. This is kind of an industry dynamic of how these, the commercial side, they have all these entities like tech support, everything else, marketing. You guys are having to do it all. So the puzzle pieces are just different sizes. I should make them different sizes.